Howe in his career playing time predominantly played for Bournemouth, making his way from the ranks after moving from London, watching Watford as a kid, and then moving to the sunny seaside of Bournemouth beaches. This is where he would go on to play for Bournemouth and become a great defender ahead of his years, many said, before leaving to go to Portsmouth. Now, Eddie Howe famously had a very bad injury in his knee, in which at the age of 24 the doctor told him that he could never play football again, but he didn't listen to the doctor. Went on to play for Portsmouth, being injured constantly, written off for the season, before being loaned out to Swindon, multiple places, and becoming injured time and time again. He would then later move back to his hometown, Bournemouth, where he would finish off his career, retiring early at the age of 29 due to his reoccurring injury, having a solid career at the end of his time at Bournemouth, and ultimately being allowed to manage the reserve teams. This is where we know Eddie Howe constantly progressed with Bournemouth. He did eventually make his way as first team coach, leaving as part of the manager's staff until being rehired as the first team coach. This is where Eddie Howe would go on to take Bournemouth all the way up the leagues, making sure they avoided relegation in League 2, progressing them constantly into the Championship, where he'd get them mid-table, but then Burnley would come calling. He stayed there for 2 years, and after a fallout with the owners, he returned to the Cherries. And this is where his 8-year stint comes into play. Howe got them to promoted into the Premier League and maintained Bournemouth in the Premier League for several years. The likes of Callum Wilson, Josh King, Nathan Ake. Bournemouth were a team who were impressive and could beat big teams until they ultimately got relegated, and this is where Eddie Howe and Bournemouth had to part ways. He was looking for his next challenge, and eventually a Saudi takeover would happen with a team up north, and they would be searching for their next manager. Newcastle United looked no further than Eddie Howe. Hello lads and ladettes of the Kieron Talks YouTube channel. Today you join me to watch Eddie Howe. We're not watching him, although I don't think I've ever watched him. Maybe in the opposite dugout, but not particularly supporting him. He is much considered at the moment the best English manager, isn't he? I would say there's probably him, maybe Graham Potter, but in terms of what Eddie Howe has done in multiple clubs, especially Bournemouth and Newcastle, where he came in, it's fantastic. And obviously people were, before Tuchel, campaigning for him to potentially be England manager. I understand why you're going Tuchel, that's a whole different conversation, because we need born winners. But Eddie Howe's story, I think you can't hate him, can you? He really is just a nice guy. Obviously, the playing career didn't work out for him, and you see this with a lot of managers. Arne Slot, like Jurgen Klopp, there's Mourinho. There's very rarely very good managers who have been very good players. Okay, coming through now, yes, you've had Pep Guardiola, you've had Xabi Alonso. Typically the holding midfielder, you know, playing well. Arteta as well, did play in that role. Who have played for more higher and superior clubs. There will be ones, but what I'm saying is, as a manager, you can also not be the best of players. It's just knowledge, isn't it? And they work in different ways. And Eddie Howe definitely made the most of a shit situation, really. Obviously, having to retire at 29 through a very, very bad injury. Not listening to doctors, as they say. Always seek medical advice and listen to it. Probably should have, but ultimately it has worked out for him. Moving around a few times around Burnley and stuff, but ultimately Bournemouth is the place where a lot of fans noticed him, because from League 2 to the Premier League, he took them. I know he had that little stint for Burnley, but getting promoted into League 2 and then returning, promoting them to the Championship, it is clear that he can deal with a squad that might not have the best players, but he can operate his tactics and get the best out of average or below average players, and he's done that at Bournemouth and exceeded expectation. Ultimately, they did end up getting relegated. You could put that to a lot of things. Obviously, some of his players got taken. They were in a bad vein of form. But he's came back, reignited at Newcastle, makes them survive relegation, and then ultimately takes them that incredible season to top four, where realistically they didn't belong there. You know, Miggy Almiron, he's playing exceptional. Just a South American. Well, no, he weren't. He was in the MLS, weren't he? And MLS, farmer boy, lighting up the Premier League, and then he reinvented Joe Linton's role. It really shows tactical awareness and managerial masterclass, which from a lot of managers you don't necessarily see a lot. You only see it from the very best, and that is why I believe he's widely considered the best English manager. I think from what he's done at Newcastle so far has been incredible. You know, maybe he can add a trophy or two to that, but his career from Bournemouth to Newcastle is sensational. And now at Newcastle, he plans to keep building one block at a time.
They want a quick game? Coming in? Let's fucking give it to me. Blow them away with our running. Let's be intense in every action that we do. Let's make it a quick game. Let's go.
Now, Eddie Howe is a man who had proven that age is only a number. At Bournemouth, he was able to go toe-to-toe with some great managers, beating the likes of Man United. It's not a hard thing to do at the moment, but he was progressing well and played an attractive style of football, making sure that his team kept clean sheets, and Newcastle were in a dire situation. After sacking Steve Bruce or mutually parting ways, they were in need of a man to get them out of the relegation, and Eddie Howe did that, winning multiple games on the bounce. He did an incredible job. A team that was not his, using players who might not have the best ability but getting the best out of them, reconfigurating roles such as Joe Linton. He saved them, and the following season he was able to go one bigger, signing players like Bruno Guimaraes, Alexander Isak, and really working his way up the table, making his way to a first Carabao Cup final against Man United, which he ultimately lost. But the big prize and the big achievement in his career so far, reaching top 4 and gaining Champions League qualification. An absolutely amazing story. Eddie Howe transformed the team from relegation fighters to top 4 Champions League contenders. And now Eddie Howe has done fantastic at the Geordies, moving from the south up to the north, to and side, and he has got them cooking from relegation to the Champions League. And some incredible nights there. The Champions League, obviously, the group of death that they had, AC Milan, Dortmund and PSG, was it? Fantastic against PSG. What a night at St James's Park, and they should have probably beat them, or at least got a draw at PSG. But that Mbappe penalty at the end, was it Livramento handballed it? Very, very arguable, you know. Champions League rules are slightly different to Premier League, and for the most part, I'm pretty sure that helped me with the bet, so I didn't mind. But the transformation shows exactly what Eddie Howe did at Bournemouth, you know, getting best out of players that are considered not the best or a bit average, you know, long staffs. Joe Linton at the time was struggling under Steve Bruce, although Steve Bruce loved him. He loved the kebabs, and getting that team ready, Eddie Howe changed it, and it really did work for him. Bringing in the likes of Dan Burn, people might not necessarily see as the best sort of players, and really evolving them into a good left back, as Dan Burn is. And that is what has taken Newcastle to almost the next level, you know. Obviously, this season is very, very tough. Competing for the top 4 spot is all that's left, realistically. The relegation's pretty much decided, and so's the champions. But in terms of the 4th spot, Newcastle are in the mix. There's Brighton, Bournemouth, Villa. There's so many. And Eddie Howe could really lead them to that. He could also lead them to their first ever trophy against Liverpool. Newcastle are the underdogs, but Eddie Howe has been the underdog throughout his career. And can he beat the mighty Liverpool to bring Newcastle their first ever trophy? That would be incredible. But I don't know whether he can. To be honest, if he doesn't, it doesn't define his career realistically in Newcastle. I think they will give him chances because of the way he's came in. People are expecting Newcastle to bring in a top manager who's won incredible trophies. Eddie Howe's sort of that middle ground. He's widely considered the best English manager for a reason, because the record of progressing teams and working with teams that might not have the best players, as I have said, is phenomenal. What he's done at Newcastle after getting relegated with Bournemouth has shown, you know, he's a man who's not to be messed with. He can change the time. He can turn the tide with certain teams. And the next step, I guess, is winning that first trophy. You've got big managers who have done it before. They have the experience. Eddie Howe doesn't have that top echelon experience, but that is the level he's going to have to go to if Newcastle want to keep him, and if he wants to bring them into that band of winning them their first trophy. He's got a chance though, and he's done well getting him the Carabao Cup final the last 2 seasons. What awaits for Eddie Howe, who knows? But I think the Newcastle fans, although he's had ups and downs, will say he's been a great manager, and so far it's been good. Will he finally win a trophy? We'll have to wait and see this weekend. It's going to be a big one. And now, although he has been questioned over recent time of his tactics, maybe the style of play that he enforces, and the players that he has at his disposal, Newcastle have signed Tonali. They have progressed further, and although they might not be in the top 4 anymore and their Champions League exit might have been a bit premature, Eddie Howe has got him into another Carabao Cup final, albeit it is against Liverpool, but we'll find out whether he can win the whole thing. That's what Newcastle are after. Teams like Villa, Newcastle, Everton, wreathed in history, but they lack recent silverware, and Eddie Howe looks to bring that back to the tune. Will he be able to beat the giants of Liverpool? So far, Newcastle this second half of the season have had a new lease of life. Isak firing, Gordon, apart from his silly red cards, playing extraordinary, and Newcastle being a robust team, hard to beat, and able to do the job at the other end of the pitch. Eddie Howe could be on the edge of something truly brilliant. Will he be able to perform, or ultimately, will the Giants of Liverpool win another trophy in their unstoppable season? Whether he wins or whether he loses, his career at Newcastle won't stop there. So far, he's done an amazing job. It's just how patient these Saudi owners are. Will they let Howe try and work his way up all the way to compete in top 4 constantly and winning these trophies? Or will they look elsewhere for a new manager? I believe he has shown the style of football that he can play and what type of manager he is. He just needs the players to do it. And as long as Newcastle let him stay and work his magic, Eddie Howe could become a Newcastle legend. And now Eddie Howe, where does his future lie? Obviously he could be getting a trophy this season, he might not, we'll have to see, but he has taken Newcastle in the right direction so far, and if the Saudis do trust him for another few years, maybe he can bring them up, but there'll be that conversation had of if they want to step up to becoming an established top 4 team, do they bring in a manager with a wealth of expertise and wealth of proven trophy experience, if you know what I mean. They know how to win trophies. Depends. Eddie Howe is a great manager, and I think ultimately, if he keeps improving and keeps providing, he will have time. Newcastle fans do love him, I feel like, whether he's had his ups and downs. I think he's a manager who is semi-established now, a bit like Graham Potter, but slightly better in the teams that he's managed and what he's managed to do. Obviously, Potter did do well with Brighton, but Eddie Howe, I think, could be snapped up by a Premier League club who would be in need of him. But ultimately, hopefully that's not the way forward. Hopefully he stays at Newcastle, building the team, getting better players, and really reinvigorating that team. His story so far has been marvellous. The chapters in the Eddie Howe book start off really bad, you know, and as all great heroes do, they move up and up and up and bang. They explode into whatever their pinnacle of life is. And maybe we're in the next chapter of Eddie Howe, winning trophies. Like that, I see 0 trophies, unfortunately. Maybe soon, though. Eddie Howe has become used to being the underdog. Will he once again prove everybody wrong?